That sentence still echoes in my head, like a confession whispered to a priest. Even now, when I look at my reflection in the mirror, I see a woman I barely recognize. Calm on the outside, maybe even graceful, but hollowed by choices she never imagined making. The day it all began was bright, painfully so. The kind of morning where sunlight feels intrusive, where every shadow hides something you don't want to see. My husband, Daniel, was sitting at the edge of our bed, still in his work shirt, his tie hanging loose around his neck. I could tell by the way his hands trembled that something had gone terribly wrong. "He fired me," he said quietly. Just those 3 words. No anger. No explanation. Just defeat. Daniel had worked at Breyer and Holt Engineering for nearly 15 years. He was loyal. The kind of man who stayed late to fix other people's mistakes and still brought home a box of donuts for me every Friday. But that morning he couldn't even meet my eyes. "Mr. Holt said it was restructuring," Daniel continued, running his palms over his face. "But I saw the look he gave me. He wanted me gone." Mr. Holt, Arthur Holt, the company's managing director, a man in his 50s, rich in the quiet, calculating way of someone who never raises his voice. I'd met him twice at company events. He'd shaken my hand longer than necessary and said, "Behind every good employee, there's an even better wife." I'd laughed politely then, not realizing how those words would come back to haunt me. That morning, Daniel's world collapsed, and mine began to crack. Before that day, our lives had been simple. We lived in a small, cream-colored house at the edge of town, a place that smelled like coffee and old books. Daniel worked at Breyer and Holt, and I taught part-time at the local community college. We didn't have children, though we'd once tried. After 3 miscarriages, the doctors told us gently that it might be time to stop trying. So we poured our love into smaller things. A garden that Daniel planted with obsessive precision, a dog named Mabel, and Sunday dinners where we'd talk about everything except what we'd lost. Our routine was steady, predictable, safe, which is why Daniel's dismissal hit like a storm through a glass house. At first, I tried to stay positive. "Maybe it's just temporary," I told him. "You're the most capable person they had." He smiled faintly. "You always say that, Lily." He was quiet for days after that. The kind of quiet that hums in the walls, heavy, suffocating. He'd sit at the kitchen table, sifting through job listings, while Mabel laid her head on his foot. Sometimes I'd hear him muttering numbers, as if trying to make the math of our new life add up. Money wasn't good. My teaching barely covered the mortgage, and Daniel's severance was enough for maybe 2 months. I offered to take more hours, but he refused. "You've carried us enough," he said one night, his voice rough. That was Daniel, proud to a fault. 2 weeks later, he went back to Breyer and Holt, hoping for a reference. I begged him not to. "Daniel, please," I whispered, holding his arm. "You don't owe them anything." But he went anyway. He came home with a strange look in his eyes, not anger this time, but confusion. "Arthur was different," he said. "He asked about you." "Me?" "He wanted to know what you've been up to, if you're still teaching." It felt personal. I remember feeling an odd chill, though I brushed it off. Arthur Holt was married, or had been, until his wife passed a few years earlier. A tragic car accident, someone had said. The kind of rumor that floated around the office. Daniel shrugged. Maybe he was just being polite. But something about it lingered. A month passed, and Daniel still hadn't found work. The tension between us grew, subtle but sharp. He'd start arguments over nothing. Over burnt toast, misplaced keys, the sound of the washing machine. Then one night, he didn't come home until midnight. His shirt smelled of whiskey. "He offered me a deal," Daniel muttered, slumping into a chair. "Arthur Holt. He wants me to consult part-time." "That's good, isn't it?" I asked, trying to keep hope alive. He looked at me for a long time before shaking his head. "He wants me to sign something first. A non-disclosure about company practices. I think," he hesitated. "I think he's covering something up." I remember the dread curling in my stomach. "What did you say?" "I told him I'd think about it," he replied. "But Lily, promise me something. Stay away from that man." Those words. I should have listened. The next morning, Daniel was gone. His car wasn't in the driveway. His phone went straight to voicemail. I called the police that evening. They found his car 2 days later, parked near the cliffs by the old quarry. The engine was off. The door was locked. Inside, they found his wedding ring on the dashboard. The note said, "I can't fix what I've broken." But I didn't believe it was suicide. Not for a second. Daniel loved life too much. He loved me too much. Something else had happened. Something darker. And at the center of it was Arthur Holt. I saw him again at Daniel's funeral. He approached me after the service, wearing a somber black suit and that same calm, detached expression I'd seen at company parties. "Lily," he said softly, "I can't tell you how sorry I am. Daniel was one of the best men I ever worked with." His voice was smooth, almost comforting. And yet, I felt a flicker of anger so hot it made me tremble. "Then why did you fire him?" I asked. For a moment his jaw tightened. Then he sighed. "Sometimes hard decisions have to be made. Business isn't always fair." I turned away, not wanting to cause a scene. But his hand brushed my arm lightly. "Too familiar, too soon. If you ever need help, with anything, financially, emotionally, please call me." I didn't answer. But I remember the way his eyes lingered, steady, assessing, like a man already deciding something. At the time, I told myself he was just being kind. But looking back, that was the first move in his game. For weeks after the funeral, the house felt unbearably silent. Daniel's tools still hung neatly in the shed, his shirt still folded in drawers. I couldn't bring myself to move them. Every night, I'd sit at the kitchen table, my hands around a mug gone cold, waiting for a sound that would never come. The soft jingle of his keys, the hum of his car pulling in. People came and went in those first few days. Neighbors brought casseroles. Colleagues left sympathy cards. Everyone meant well, but grief is a private language, and none of them spoke it the way I did. Except for one person who refused to fade away. Arthur Holt. He called 2 weeks after the funeral. His voice was low, careful, almost gentle. "Lily, I wanted to check in on you. I know this must be unbearable." I didn't know how to respond. I didn't owe him my grief. But loneliness has a strange way of softening your defenses. He continued. "I realize how hard things must be financially. Daniel mentioned you'd been teaching part-time. I'd like to offer help, a position if you're open to it. We have a charity foundation, and we could use someone with your education background." I hesitated. I didn't want his charity. But the mortgage reminders were stacking up, and my small savings were thinning fast. "I don't know," I murmured. "It wouldn't feel right." Arthur's tone grew warmer. "It's not about charity. It's about respect. Daniel was like family to this company. This is my way of honoring him." Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe I just wanted to believe that someone still remembered Daniel kindly. So after a long pause I said yes. The office was different from what I remembered. Colder, quieter. I was stationed in a separate building, part of the company's community outreach division. My role was mostly administrative, managing reports, drafting proposals for school partnerships. Arthur would stop by occasionally, never unannounced, yet always unexpectedly. "You bring light into this office," he said one morning, setting down a cup of coffee on my desk. "It's nice having someone here who remembers Daniel." There was sincerity in his voice, or something that resembled it. I found myself softening. He'd talk about his late wife sometimes, in that mournful, practiced tone of widowers who know sorrow earns them sympathy. "She was the love of my life," he told me one evening as we stayed late going over a proposal. But after she passed, I stopped believing I could feel that kind of connection again. I didn't realize until later how neatly he'd planted that seed. Over the next few months, Arthur became constant. He'd drop by with lunch, insisting I eat something warm. He'd send messages checking if I'd gotten home safely. Once, when my car wouldn't start in the parking lot, he insisted on driving me home. Inside the car, the air smelled faintly of expensive cologne. Something deep, musky, too intimate for a boss. "Lily," he said quietly, hands steady on the wheel. "You don't have to keep punishing yourself. Daniel would want you to live." I looked out the window, my chest tightening. "I'm trying." He nodded, and his voice softened. You're stronger than you think. When he dropped me off, he didn't leave immediately. His eyes lingered again, that same unreadable gaze I'd seen at the funeral. Then he smiled and said, "You deserve to be happy again." That night, I cried. Not because of what he said, but because part of me wanted to believe it. A few weeks later, I received a letter from the pension board. Daniel's employment benefits were being reviewed due to unresolved company matters. I went to Arthur's office in a panic. "They're withholding his pension," I said, voice trembling. "They say something about internal disputes." He looked up slowly, feigning surprise. "That's absurd. Leave it to me. I'll handle it personally." He reached across the desk and touched my hand lightly. "You've been through enough, Lily. Let me take care of this." I withdrew my hand uneasy. But again I didn't push. A week later, another letter arrived. The pension was reinstated, but under new terms. The funds would be transferred to the surviving spouse's account pending oversight. Arthur congratulated me. "See? I told you I'd take care of it." It felt like relief then. I didn't see it for what it was, a leash, not a lifeline. By the end of that year, Arthur and I were spending more time together. Dinners after work. Weekend charity events. He'd introduced me to colleagues as a dear friend of Daniel's, and a wonderful woman in her own right. People began to talk, of course. "You're glowing again," one coworker said, half joking. "Mr. Holt must have something to do with that." I laughed it off, embarrassed. But at night, I'd find myself thinking about him. The warmth in his voice. The steady way he looked at me. As if I was someone worth saving. Grief is dangerous that way. It makes you vulnerable to anyone who offers direction. So when Arthur invited me to dinner one evening, a quiet restaurant by the river, I said yes. He wore a dark blue suit, and for the first time he didn't look like my husband's former boss. He looked like a man. We talked for hours. About loss. About loneliness. About starting over. When he walked me to my car, the air smelled of rain and jasmine from a nearby garden. He reached for my hand, hesitated, then said softly, "You don't have to be alone forever, Lily." My breath caught. "Arthur. I'm not asking for anything tonight," he said. "I just needed you to know that I care." I didn't stop him when he kissed my hand. 2 months later he proposed. Not with grand gestures. Just a quiet dinner at his home. Candlelight flickering across polished marble counters. "Lily," he said, his voice a steady murmur. "I know this may seem sudden, but I want to take care of you. You've suffered enough. Let me give you peace." I stared at him. My heart divided between fear and gratitude. "I don't know if I'm ready," I whispered. He smiled faintly. "Love doesn't wait for readiness. It waits for courage." Those words, they disarmed me. And like someone sleepwalking through her own life, I said yes. The day we married was small and quiet. Just us and 2 witnesses from his company. No flowers, no family. I wore a soft gray dress, not white. It didn't feel like a new beginning. It felt like an ending I couldn't name. Afterward, he took me to his estate, the kind of house you see in magazines. Everything gleamed. Glass, chrome, silence. He poured wine and raised a toast. "To second chances," he said. But as I looked around that perfect, empty house, I felt something colder than fear. Because even surrounded by all that wealth, I realized I didn't feel like a wife. I felt like property. At first, I told myself I just needed time to adjust. To the new house. The new rhythm. The new man I was supposed to love. Arthur was attentive. Too attentive. He'd insist on managing everything. Bills, repairs, even my personal mail. "You shouldn't worry about paperwork anymore," he'd say with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You've done enough worrying for one lifetime." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to let go of the endless weight that grief had carved into my bones. So I nodded, and little by little, I stopped asking questions. Until the day I noticed something strange. It was a rainy Tuesday morning. I'd gone to the bank to deposit a check from my old teaching contract. The teller, a polite young woman, frowned at her screen. "Mrs. Holt," she said carefully, "did you mean to move all your pension payments into a joint account?" My chest tightened. "I didn't move anything." She hesitated. "It looks like there was a transfer authorization, signed by you." She turned the monitor slightly. There it was, my signature, perfect, identical. But I'd never signed that paper. When I got home, Arthur was in his study, reading the financial pages like he always did. I stood in the doorway, my umbrella dripping onto the hardwood floor. "Arthur," I said softly, "why is my pension in a joint account?" He looked up slowly, expression unreadable. "Because we're married, Lily. That's what couples do, we share things." "I didn't sign anything." He smiled faintly, as if humoring a child. "Of course you did. Don't you remember the pension adjustment forms? I handled them for you. You probably just forgot." But I hadn't forgotten. I never would. Something in his tone, that subtle mix of patience and dismissal, made me realize how easily he could make truth sound like confusion. That night, while he slept, I searched the desk drawers in his office. Folders, contracts, tax documents, everything organized to perfection. Then I found a small locked drawer. The key wasn't hard to find. Arthur's arrogance was his weakness. He thought no one would dare look. Inside was a manila envelope labeled Holt Holdings, Personal. And inside that, papers. Lots of them. One caught my eye, beneficiary revision form, pension account of Lily Holt. At the bottom, in neat ink, my signature. Below it, in smaller type, upon spouse's death, all residual pension assets to be transferred to Arthur Holt, sole beneficiary. I read that line over and over until my hands began to shake. He had married me for my pension. Not for love. Not even for companionship. Just money. The very thing Daniel had died trying to protect. I barely slept that night. Every creak of the house felt amplified. Every breath beside me felt like a threat. By morning, I knew what I had to do, but I had to move carefully. Arthur was too controlled, too observant. If he sensed my suspicion, I'd lose my chance. I started keeping notes. Quietly, discreetly. Dates times little details. How he'd take calls late at night and lower his voice. How he'd mention investments maturing soon. How once, when I walked into his office unexpectedly, he minimized his email and said, "You shouldn't read financial documents you don't understand." The condescension barely hid the panic in his eyes. 2 weeks later, fate handed me an opportunity. Arthur left for a business trip in Chicago. I had the house to myself for 3 days. The morning after he left, I went straight to his office again. This time, I was looking for something specific. Confirmation that Daniel's suicide had never been what it seemed. I found it in a folder labeled Employee Legal Settlements. Inside, copies of internal memos from Breyer and Holt. And there, near the top, my husband's name. The memo was dated 2 days before Daniel's death. Subject: Internal Review. Employee Daniel Carter. Due to the recent discovery of financial discrepancies within Project Halcyon, Mr. Carter has expressed intent to contact authorities. Immediate containment measures recommended. H. Arthur Holt. I could barely breathe. Daniel had discovered something, probably company fraud, and Arthur had silenced him. The firing, the restructuring, the sudden death, it had all been part of the same cover-up. And then he'd married me to secure what was left. My pension, my silence, my life. I sat on the floor, shaking, surrounded by papers that told a story my heart had already known. Outside, the rain began to fall again, soft at first, then harder, until the sound filled the whole house. I looked at the window and saw my reflection, pale, hollow-eyed, trembling. That was the night I stopped being a victim, that I knew I couldn't confront him yet. He was too careful, too powerful. But I could collect proof. So I scanned everything. The forged signatures, the memos, the pension transfer forms. I uploaded copies to a cloud drive under a false name. And then I made an appointment with a lawyer. Quietly, under the guise of estate planning. When Arthur returned from his trip, he brought gifts. A silk scarf. A pearl bracelet. "For my beautiful wife," he said, kissing my cheek. His hands were warm. His smile was practiced. And for the first time I smiled back, matching his performance perfectly. Because now I knew his game. And I intended to end it on my terms. Over the next few weeks, I played my role flawlessly. I cooked dinners. I laughed at his dry jokes. I let him believe that I was content in his gilded world. But behind that facade, I was preparing. The lawyer confirmed what I suspected. The forged documents, if proven, could nullify the marriage and open an investigation into Daniel's death, especially with those company memos as evidence. We just needed one more thing. Proof of intent. That proof came sooner than I expected. One evening, while Arthur was showering, his phone buzzed on the nightstand. The message preview lit up the screen. Transfer confirmed. Upon her death, assets move immediately. Proceed with discretion. My blood ran cold. He wasn't just planning to rob me. He was planning to kill me. When Arthur stepped out of the bathroom, towel around his shoulders, I was already calm, unnaturally so. Everything okay? He asked, drying his hair. Yes, I said softly. Just thinking about the future. He smiled. That's my Lily. Always planning ahead. If only he knew how far ahead I was planning. The hardest part about pretending was how natural it became. I woke up beside the man who ruined my husband's life, smiled at his lies, and served him breakfast with steady hands. Every moment was an act. Every word, a thread in the trap I was weaving. I had to be patient. If Arthur sensed even the slightest change, a hesitation, a tremor, a question I shouldn't ask, he would strike first. So I smiled. I kissed his cheek. I laughed when he teased me about my overthinking. And then I started planting seeds of my own. My lawyer, a sharp, unflappable woman named Mara Nguyen, guided me through every step. We met in the back corner of a cafe 2 towns over, always at different times, always under another name. Lily, she said one morning, flipping through her notes. You have enough to expose the fraud. But if you want to tie his hands completely, you'll need to let him incriminate himself. How? I asked. She leaned in. Get him to admit it, on record. Even subtly. Anything that connects him to Daniel's death, or the forged pension documents. It sounded impossible. Arthur was too calculated to confess. But arrogance makes clever men careless. That night over dinner, I began my act. We were eating roasted chicken, his favorite. He'd poured us wine, a deep red that caught the candlelight like blood. I kept my tone soft, hesitant. Arthur, can I ask you something? He looked up, curious. Of course. Do you ever feel guilty? He raised a brow. About what? About what happened with Daniel. For a brief moment, I saw something flash behind his eyes, irritation, maybe even fear. Then he recovered, smiling faintly. You can't blame yourself forever, Lily. What happened to Daniel was tragic, but it was his choice. I studied him carefully. You sound so certain. I was there, he said simply. I know how men think when they're desperate. My heart thudded. You were there. He paused, realizing his slip. I mean figuratively. I smiled, slow and deliberate. Of course. I excused myself soon after, taking my wineglass with me. When he wasn't looking, I slipped it into a sealed bag. Fingerprints, DNA, something for the investigators later. Step by step, the puzzle was falling into place. Over the next few weeks, I continued to build my case. I wore a tiny recording device Mara had given me, disguised as a brooch Daniel had once gifted me. Every time Arthur mentioned money, pensions, or security, I asked careful questions. Gentle, harmless on the surface. You've always been so good with finances, I'd say, my tone admiring. I wouldn't even know where to begin if you weren't around. He'd smile smug. That's the beauty of our arrangement, Lily. You don't have to worry about a thing. Everything transfers automatically. Transfers automatically. Every phrase was a thread tightening around his neck. One afternoon, I told him I wanted to update my will, to make things easier. His eyes lit up. That's very practical of you. He even offered to help draft it. That night, while he reviewed the papers I'd printed, decoys Mara had prepared, I turned on a small voice recorder hidden in the bookshelf behind him. He read through the lines slowly, murmuring under his breath. Beneficiary, surviving spouse, he chuckled. At least we're consistent. Consistent? I asked innocently. He looked up. You'd be surprised how often people forget to align their pension and estate documents. You've got nothing to worry about now. He smiled again, that same polished expression, the one that had fooled investors, employees, me. But not anymore. The next day, I went to Mara's office with the recordings. She listened, taking notes. "This is good," she said. "Not perfect, but strong. We'll need one final piece, something undeniable." "What kind of piece?" She hesitated. "A confession. Something direct, in his voice, tying him to both the fraud and Daniel's death. If we can't get that, we'll need to stage a situation where he reveals his hand." "Stage a situation?" "Yes. Something that makes him feel in control, so he drops his guard." The opportunity arrived unexpectedly. Arthur told me he was hosting a private dinner for investors at the Breyer and Holt headquarters, a small, exclusive group. "I want you there," he said. "You'll make a perfect impression. Poised, elegant, trustworthy." Trustworthy. The irony almost made me laugh. I agreed, of course. And with Mara's help, I planned my move. The night of the dinner, I wore a black silk dress and the brooch recorder again. But this time, Mara had upgraded it to transmit live to a secure recording line. The building glowed with city lights. Waiters glided between tables. Laughter mingled with the clinking of glasses. Arthur was in his element. Charming, confident, utterly untouchable. Midway through the evening, he leaned toward me and whispered, "There's something I need you to sign later. Just some formalities. Pension adjustments after the merger." My heart pounded. Tonight. Better sooner than later. He smiled. "We'll do it in my office after everyone leaves." Exactly as I'd hoped. When the dinner ended and the last guest left, I followed him upstairs. His office overlooked the city, a perfect stage. He poured us drinks, then slid a folder across the desk. "Just sign here." I opened it, the form titled Post-Spousal Death. He didn't even bother to hide it anymore. "Arthur," I said quietly, "what exactly is this?" He didn't answer right away. He circled me slowly, like a hunter. "You really don't need to know the details. It's all just paperwork, ensures the funds don't get stuck in probate." I met his eyes. "And what if I die sooner than expected?" He froze. "What are you implying?" I took a step closer, lowering my voice. "Maybe I've realized what Daniel realized before me. That you're not a man who leaves loose ends." His mask slipped for just a moment. "You should be careful what you suggest, Lily." "Oh, I am," I whispered. "Very careful." For the first time, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Not charm, not composure. Fear. And then the phone on the desk buzzed. Arthur turned toward it, irritated. Before he could answer, I said softly, "You won't need to take that. It's probably my lawyer." He froze again. "You're what?" I smiled. "She has everything, Arthur. Every document. Every recording. Every lie you've told." His face went pale. The brooch gleamed faintly in the lamplight, still recording. He tried to laugh it off at first. "You're bluffing." "Am I?" I stepped closer. "You think you can forge my name, steal my husband's pension, and plan my death, and no one will notice?" He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came. His hands clenched. "You don't know what you're doing," he finally hissed. "You'll lose everything." "Maybe," I said softly, "but at least I'll still be alive." That night, I left his office with the signed folder, and a recording that would destroy him. By the next morning, Mara had filed everything with the authorities. Arthur Holt's empire began to crumble before sunrise.